Hi, everybody. This is Dr. Albus for LING 200 at Montgomery College. I'm going to give a quick overview of syllable structure, prosody, and other suprasegmental features. So let's remember that phonology here, the domain, we started with the domain of phonemes, and those include distinct speech sounds such as consonants and vowels. And we've covered the distribution of phonemes in phoneme inventories, the classes. For example, the nasals are m, n, and ng, and we don't have other kinds of nasals, for example. And we covered the rules of changes of the phonemes into their allophones, what is called allophonic variation, such as the phoneme p with its allophones, the unaspirated p and the aspirated p word initially. So those are things that we've covered. We talked a little bit about phonotactics, and so you can see that word tactics, so the sort of the strategies of sounds, right? Rules and restrictions regarding syllable shape and combinations of phonemes and syllables. So in English, we have, for example, the clusters at the beginnings of words, PL, the pl consonant cluster, and the pr consonant cluster, but we do not have ps. And of course, we have the word psychology, and we don't pronounce that P, do we? In psychology, we just pronounce this part. And pt, we don't have something like that in, whoops, I forgot to mark it with that asterisk, which means it's ungrammatical, right, in English. But in other languages, it is okay. So finally, there's this term prosody, and it has to do with syllables, words, includes phrases, sentences, concepts such as stress, intonation, tones, and rhythm. So it's on top of all of the other things we've covered so far. So let's take a look at some of these categories, and let's talk about stress first. And one way to introduce it is by looking at what's called lexical stress, and lexical means related to words. So intensity on syllables in words. Stress is lexically specified in English. Let's see here. And so let's take a look at these three words, and if you check the pronunciation yourself, try to find out where the most intense syllable is. And so is it photograph, photograph, photograph? And typically, more typically, and this is always something you have to check in certain words, but photograph is more likely where that's stressed. And but now it's in this word which has photograph in it, photography is stressed in the second syllable, not in the first one. It's not photography. You can try to say that, and someone will say, well, that doesn't sound right, and that's because we know this needs to be stressed, okay? And then in this word, it is further moved over. It's not well, you could say photographic. Photographic is probably the best place to stress that. Photographic memory, photographic memory. However, we do have a stress here. This is the secondary stress. This is the primary stress. So it's kind of complicated, but again, it's lexical. And so wherever this word occurs in a sentence, I'm going to stress photograph in that particular place. Okay. And in English, we go farther, and we can distinguish words by stress. So here are two sentences. That is the object, and I object to that proposal. So let's take a look at those two words there. And when we pronounce this one, that is the object, and you stress the first syllable. Okay? But when it's a verb, when the lawyer says, I object, and that's where the stress is. And the difference between these is part of speech. So that is the object is a noun, and I object to that proposal is a verb. We have a number of these in English. It's the same thing with subject. That is the subject and the object, and then to subject someone to something, that's a verb. And it's the same with words such as record. You record a record. Okay, the record is, oops, I didn't mean to, there we go. and record. All right, so this is a very common pattern in English, and there are dozens more of these pairs of words that are distinguished by stress. So clearly, lexical stress is very important in English. In other languages, there can be lexical stress, but they can also have just phonological stress patterns. And so in prescriptive Indonesian, the real complication is more complex, and different linguists claim that there is not so much a pattern as is prescribed. But in prescriptive Indonesian, the primary stress in a word is supposedly falls on the prefinal or penultimate syllable. So prefinal or penultimate. Let's see what that means. Of course, in a word with one syllable, it's going to have a stress on that one syllable. So ka in Indonesian is two, and that has itself its own stress. But this word here, maksud, and then kepada and sandiwara. In each case, it's the prefinal syllable. That is, here's the final syllable, here's the prefinal syllable, here's the final syllable, here's the penultimate syllable. Okay, here's the last syllable, this is the one before that last syllable. And so this is a phonological stress pattern that happens. It's not lexically specified. It depends on the number of syllables a word has. But again, the situation is more complex. And there's a lot of variation and such. But it gives you a sense of what phonological stress patterns are, and different languages do have identifiable phonological stress patterns. Another type of prosody is tone, and it goes, so of course there are consonants and vowels, but in addition to consonants and vowels, which are minimally distinctive in to help us distinguish words, the meanings of words. In Chinese, each syllable has its own specified pitch and contour. And in fact, there are some other features as well, but this is what we focus on. And so, for example, the word ma is a level tone. And if you hear me pronounce it ma, I'm keeping it level. The word for to be numb, ma, and we'll call that a rising tone. And so it starts kind of maybe kind of somewhat low and rising up to a higher point. So that's our pitch and contour. This one here for horse, in the kind of prescriptive pronunciation of it, it's ma, which is what we can call a dipping tone. But in fact, in rapid speech, it very often is simply a low tone, ma. But that's in the midst of speech. But in a hyperarticulated one, it has this dipping tone type, again, kind of a prescriptive thing. Finally, for scold, ma, and it's a high falling tone. And so when we pronounce all of these ma, 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 we are exemplifying lexical tone in words, and that's how Chinese words function. Now, in addition to stress and tone, lexical stress, lexical tone, and phonological stress, we have intonation. And so that's our pitch movement over phrases and clauses. We can highlight words and phrases, sometimes with pauses, and they indicate and express emotions and a variety of communicative functions. So let's take a look at some samples here. And so I'm giving you this sentence multiple times, and if I were to change that, let's make it neutral. How can you do that? And I might stress the word do, and that would be fine. And stress here is actually for part of the intonation. So if you envision intonation as a kind of a moving line, how can he do that? Okay. Let's change it, though. If I want to focus on him, how can he do that? Okay, how can he do that? And what if I don't like what he did? How can he do that? Okay. Of course, I can focus on this. How can he do that? And that finally our last one, how can he do that? And so in each case, there's a slightly different intonational emphasis, but in addition, it highlights or focuses on the key words, key parts of the phrase. Am I focusing on him or am I focusing on what he did, and that sort of thing. Um, there are other things that you can do. Of course, asking questions, you use maybe a rising intonation, or command, you use a falling intonation in English, right? So, what's he doing? And I kind of have a falling intonation. Are you going to go? With a rising intonation. Okay, so there are a variety of communicative functions, and we focus on things. And note that prosody can help identify syntactic units, especially with respect to pauses. So in these two sentences here, they invited Bob, and I paused, and Bill and Al got rejected. But if I were to speak and pause it here, they invited Bob and Bill, and Al got rejected. And so you can tell that these are grouped together in this one, and these are grouped together in this one, and that's sort of separate, and that one's sort of separate by the pause in what I'm speaking. So, and watch this. Whenever you want something, the best thing to do is tell me. And I paused here. And that becomes our noun phrase. It's another way to identify syntactic units, such as a noun phrase. Okay. All right, so this leads to the issue of syllable structure and phonotactics. So we can talk about the maximal syllable templates. And you'll say, what's a maximal syllable template? Well, in English, the maximal syllable template is this: consonant, 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 vowel, consonant, 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 which is exemplified by the word strengths. You can see that consonant, 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 and consonant, consonant, consonant. We don't have anything more than that, no more than 3 consonants. But in other languages, such as Cambodian, you can only have 2 consonants at the beginning. In Japanese, you can only have 1 at the beginning. In Vietnamese, mostly 1 consonant. There is a possibility of having 2 consonants, but the second consonant, let's call that the C2, can only be combined. It can only be W. So as in the famous Vietnamese name Nguyen, and I've added a little tone mark here, Nguyen. Okay. All right, so let's take a look. In English, maximal and minimum syllable shapes. And we can see here you can have just a vowel, and then it can continue, and you can add increasing consonant complexity, but we do not have this. Okay. Note that the first consonant cannot be N, the engma, that NG sound, okay? So again, on these phonotactics and syllable structure, we can have these syllable combinations, and as we saw before, you can have pla and pra, but not psa or pta, but in other languages, those are possible. Vietnamese has a syllable structure which is more limited, and it has, of course, all languages are going to have something with a V and CV, but the maximum shape, it cannot include this. It cannot have these kind of complex consonant clusters. It can have consonant plus W. All right. So this sort of question of syllable structure is something you can see in the WALS database, and let's take a look at that. There. Okay, so syllables can be simple, moderately complex, or complex. And taking a look at this nice colorful map here, let's make that a little smaller. Okay, and get me out of the way. Okay, there we go. So it looks like moderately complex, sort of in the middle range. And you see here clusters of them. So somewhat more complex over here in Europe, somewhat less, moderately complex in many languages around the world. But you see these clusters of them. Here's a cluster of red versus a cluster of violet down there. And whoops, let's go back. Okay, this is a typological question that we can ask about a language. Is it a syllable structure simple, moderately complex, or complex? And those are the kinds of things when we're looking at prosody that you can explore. So I hope that gives you some ideas you can use when you're doing linguistic research. Good luck.